Well, hello. Thanks for coming back to check out another video. So, we are here today to sit down and talk about some of our favorite subjects, eyeshadow palettes, and eyeshadow palettes with pan in them. I love to sit down and film these kinds of videos. I love to watch these kinds of videos. I just think they're so fun, and it's such a fun way for me to sit down and kind of like pat myself on the back, like, look at all these palettes with all these pans in them. It's just fun, okay? So I have done this video a few times on my channel, but I don't really keep track of like what's a new pan or what was featured in like the previous video that we did. Maybe that is something that I should keep like better track of. I don't know. Let me know down below if you feel that way. But in the description box, I will link the most recent version of this just in case you want to go check that out first, then come to this, and then you yourself could see what's a new pan versus, you know, this was already a pan that you had in your collection. So hopefully all of this sounds exciting to you. Let's not make this introduction too rambly. I will do timestamps, like chapters maybe, I guess, of like, we'll break it up by brand. We'll go in alphabetical order. How's that? Okay, so before we actually get into the eyeshadow pans, I do just want to say that I have a total number of 951 pans throughout all of my eyeshadow palettes. Now that does include my ColourPop Super Shock shadows. I did not bring those out to show in this video, but I do have 4 Super Shock shadows that have pan on them. So out of all of my pans, the 951, I have 56 eyeshadows with pan on them or in them, however you want to say that. So if we calculate that out, that gives us a pan percentage of roughly about 5.8%, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't really have like a goal number for like pan percentage. I just think it's a fun number to look at. I feel like a lot of people just enjoy hearing that little statistic, so I just like to include it in these videos. Okay, so the first palette to talk about comes from Adept Cosmetics. This is the Heather Austin palette that she did as a collaboration palette with them this year. So I do have 3 pans of eyeshadow within this palette. I have pan on the shade Passport, 0603, and Austin. And these are 3 of my favorite shimmer shadows from within this palette. Passport is just this lovely shifty shade. It goes from like a blue to like a pink to like a purple, and it has a little bit of green to it too. 0603 isn't like a shifty shade, but it's one of those really nice like gray taupey shades, and it has a little bit of like blue glitters to it, so I just absolutely love wearing it in like more neutral eye looks. And then Austin is a shifty shade. It's like a white based shadow that has like a blue green shift to it, so I just absolutely love this palette. Love pulling it out and doing full-on looks, or just coming into this and using one of those like special shimmer shades. You guys have heard me ramble on and on about this palette, but just know it does have 3 pans of eyeshadow in it. Alright, so we can't do this video without pulling out our ABH Jackie Aina palette, another really good collab palette. Absolutely love this. This is my palette that has the most pans in it as we sit here today. So there are 10 pans in this palette as a whole. So I do have pans on the shades Soleil, Supreme, Pinker, Credit, Lithuanian, Zam, Shookington, Trust Issues, Edges, and Sponsored. I really love to use Trust Issues as a topper shadow, so I feel like this shade as a whole gets a lot of use from me just within my collection. It's a really pretty white shade, but it has like this goldness to it, so it's really pretty to put Wigglies, the red shade, all over your lids and then top Trust Issues off on top of it. You're gonna get like a really pretty like intense fiery sunset kind of look. So but yeah, the pan is the biggest in this Trust Issue shade. That's why I was pointing it out. Second would be Sponsored. I get a lot of use out of this. It's one of those like black base brown shades that has like a green shift to it, so right up Haley's alley. Do love that. But yeah, just this palette as a whole, it's gotten a lot of use from me, obviously, with 10 pans of eyeshadow in it, and I really enjoy having this one in my collection. Alright, so we have 3 BH Cosmetics palettes, only 3. I need to step up my game because I keep telling you BH Cosmetics is my favorite brand. So, the first one is one of their Birthstone palettes, so this is the Emerald for May palette. I do have 4 pans in this palette as we sit here today, so Total Package, Restless, Stubborn, and Artsy AF. I really love the formula of BH Cosmetics, but I do love the formula of these Birthstone palettes. I feel like some of the Birthstone palettes were not as well done as some other ones, but this Emerald one is the really great BH Cosmetics formula. This Restless shade, it's like an army green shade. Honestly, the palette is worth it just for that shade. I feel like sometimes this kind of like army green shade can come off a little bit patchy and just not blend out as well. Like I have this shade in other palettes and I don't really enjoy it. But this one is so nice, so pretty, so easy to work with. So really do enjoy pulling out this palette, and especially using it. I can use it to create full-on looks with, which I really appreciate since it is such a small palette, but it does make a really nice companion palette as well. So up next from BH Cosmetics, we have the Blueberry Muffin palette. Now, I feel really ashamed to tell you there's only one pan of eyeshadow in this palette. So it is in the shade Yummy right here. Yummy is one of those really pretty kind of icy purple shades. It's on the lighter side, but it's not so light that you can't appreciate the purpleness to it. I think that makes sense. But yeah, I always rave about this being like a favorite palette, and so I only have one pan of eyeshadow in it. But I will say I have some really good dips on some of these other shades, like Fluffy, 350 Degrees, Decadent, and then I have a pretty good dip on Cravings right here, which Cravings is a really pretty lid shade. It's kind of like a pinky champagne, but it's also a really pretty inner corner highlight shade. So I'm hoping to pull this palette out and get a lot more use out of it and put a lot more pans into this palette. So the last BH Cosmetics palette that I have to show you is Smitten in Switzerland, which was part of their travel series. I have mine in the old packaging, and I just like to point that out because I think they changed the names of some of the shades in the new packaging. So, 2 pans in this palette. I have pan on the shade Snowcap. No one is surprised. This is just a standard lid setting shade for Haley. And then I count this shade Slope as pan. So, it's finished off. Like I did finish this shade off. It was like a nice, kind of taupey gray shade. I like to include the shadows that I have finished off within my pan percentage because that was a feat, a task, like a triumph to finish off an actual shadow. So I keep it in there and I include it in my pan percentage because technically you did hit pan on it in order to finish it off, you know? Let me know down below though if you disagree and think that I should take out the shades that I have finished. Alright, so keeping in the alphabetical order theme, we're going to skip on over to Be Perfect. So this is the palette that they did in collaboration with Stacey Marie. This is the Carnival 4 or the Antidote palette. So this is the one that is a very fall color story. It's just a lot of good grungy colors, a lot of warm tone, orangey reds and yellows up here. And then, like I said, grunginess down here. So I do actually have 2 pans. Now these 2 pans that I have are not really surprising. So this first one is in the shade Chestnut here. This is just a really nice dark brown shadow. I love using this in the outer V. This is also my current eyebrow shade. So I will probably just plow through this, use it up completely. And then the other pan I have in here is not really surprising. It's the shade Dove, which again is just a cream setting shade. So I've been using this shadow to set down my eyeshadow primer simply because I have this palette out on my vanity since I do use it for my eyebrows every time I do my makeup. So that is the cream shade that I'm reaching for, and I apologize that I just blinded you with the mirror. Okay, so switching on over to ColourPop. So the Limoncello palette, I just have 1 pan in here. Like I said, I'm going to count my shadows that I have finished off. So the shade Vespa here, maybe you can see that nice empty pan. The shade Vespa was kind of like this shade Chestnut from the Carnival palette that we just got done talking about. It was just a really nice chocolatey kind of brown shade. So I used it up in my eyeshadows. I will say a little bit of it did crack, fall out, and crumble. So I didn't use this fully up to completion, but I had used I would say a good 70% of the shadow. So I'm still fine counting it as I finished off the shadow. But yeah, that would be the only one from my ColourPop Limoncello palette. And then this is the part where I would show you the 4 Super Shock shadows, but just to be honest, I'm just a little lazy. I forgot to grab them, and I just, let's just move on, okay? Okay, so Juvia's Place is the next brand that we will talk about. So the Festival palette is coming in. I do have 3, ooh, almost dropped it. That would have been so sad. I do have 3 pans in this palette. So this first shade, the Matte Red, the center shade, the Hot Pink, and then this kind of mustardy shade is the 3 that I do have pan in. You guys have heard me rave about this palette time and time again. It is a favorite eyeshadow palette for me. I know the color story is a little bit chaotic, but once you sit down and play with it, I think that you would find that it makes a lot of sense and it's really fun to come to this. You can get very nice neutral eye looks from this, and you can go a little bit bolder and get some more colorful eye looks. Alright, so up next is my One Kaleidos palette to feature in this. So this is a collaboration palette with Angelica Nyqvist. So this was the Club Nebula palette. And if I open this up, try to not blind you with the mirror. Let's see. Right, ooh, that really is kind of blinding, isn't it? So I have pans on the shades Firefly, 7 of 9, Queen of Blades, Void, Cylon, Rock Hopper, Naru, Nova, and Red Giant. So that should make for 9 eyeshadows in total with pan. So this is my second most panned palette is what I was going to say. I think that's a fair way to phrase it, right? Because the ABH palette from with Jackie Aina had 10 pans, so this one has 9. So yeah, my second most panned palette. Absolutely love this. Have raved about it a lot on my channel. This is a palette that I am trying to pan. I'm just taking a short break from it as I do my palettes on the chopping block, but I miss this palette. Like, I miss coming to it and just pulling off some really great, like, effortless eye looks. So I think that says a lot about a palette when you actually miss it and can't wait to get back to it, and especially if it's one that you're panning. Alright, so let's talk about another favorite brand. This would be Lorac. So this is my Fairy Tale Forest palette. However, I did mix shadows from this palette as well as the Noir palette to create my perfect palette. I'm really glad that I did that. I really do enjoy coming into this palette. It is just a great neutral palette in my collection. So I have panned on 3 of the eyeshadows. I did not keep the little sleeve with the shade names since I combined the 2 palettes. So I just have these listed in my spreadsheets as like shade 1, 2, 3, 4. You get the idea. So the first shadow with pan on it is this second shade here. Now this is a shadow much like the Trust Issue shade from the ABH Jackie Aina palette. It is a white shadow that has like a little bit of goldness to it, but it also has like a little bit of pinkness to it. It's just really pretty. I love it as a topper shade. I don't really use it as a like full-on lid shade. It works better as a topper shade or an inner corner highlight. Then I have pan on this matte shade here. So this is just a neutral matte brown kind of shadow. It works really well as like a transition shade. Almost lost my train of thought, but I did find it. It works really well as a transition shade, and it goes so nicely with all of the shadows within this palette that I did keep, so it's just effortless to put in and like incorporate into a variety of different looks. And then I have pan on this kind of like, it's like a gray-green shade down here. It was a shade that I was experimenting with and trying to use in my eyebrows. I did really enjoy it. Right now, I've just been more into like a more brown eyebrow kind of look, but typically I do go for gray eyeshadows in my eyebrows, so I will probably get back to this, and that will be another shadow that I eventually finish off using it as an eyebrow shade. Alright, Menagerie Killer Purr is next on the list. So I only have 2 pans in this. I used to count it that I had 3 pans because this Antelope shade here was a shadow that I had completely panned using it as an eyebrow shade. It is a nice like gray shade, but I repurchased it as a single and then just stuck it into this palette, so I'm no longer counting it that I like finished off that shade because it exists again. But yeah, I do have pan here on the kind of like, I don't know, it's not really an army green, but it's not really a forest green. It's kind of a mix of the two. It's like if you took a forest green or like an emerald green and made it grungy. It's a really pretty shadow. But I have pan on that, and then I have pan on the mustard shade here, this matte shade. So I really do enjoy this palette. I feel like this is a great like summer palette, but it's also a really pretty fall palette, and I'm kind of kicking myself in the booty because I don't think I included this in my like fall palettes video, but it would have been a perfect palette to add into that. Alright, Nabla Dreamy 2 does have 1 pan in it. Now, the pan in my Nabla Dreamy 2 is not really an exciting one because it is just this first shade, Pantheon, which is a matte cream shade. But I will say, there's not a ton of matte cream shades that I have with pan on them. I've been doing a really good job of trying to just like hit pan on them and then finish them off. But yeah, that is the only shade from within this palette that does have pan on it. I will say this Lucid Dream shade down here does have quite a nice dip on it, but it is exactly like the Trust Issue shade from the Jackie Aina palette. It's a white base shade with the gold shifts. So if I want like a topper shadow like that, I'm more likely to reach for the Jackie Aina palette simply because I would love to start finishing off shadows from that palette. Okay, 4 more palettes to go, so let's talk about some Natasha Denona. So I do have the Metropolis palette here, which is very reflective in that ring light. So this is one of the larger palettes, but it's not got as much product as some of the like other larger palettes. Like The larger palettes that she has like 2 grams of product in them. I think these pans only have 1 gram of product in them. But either way, I have 4 pans within this palette. So I have pan on this kind of, it's a really dark like army green shade, but it does have a little bit of grayness to it. I have pan on this like kind of, we'll say emerald green shade. I'm really terrible at describing colors, obviously. Then I have pan on this dark blue shade. I know it looks like a black for you guys on camera, but it is a dark blue. I do know that the shade name is Enigma. I do have like the little sleeve with the shade names, but I just can't be bothered to reference them for this video. So then the fourth and final pan in this palette is this bottom corner shade here. This is like a more brown version of this top green shade here. So really pretty. All of the pans that I have within this palette are in her cream to powder shadow formula. I do feel like it is a little bit easier to hit pan on those types of shades within her palette just because they tend to be a little bit more malleable. But I'm okay with like hitting pan on those and trying to move through them a little bit more quickly because since they are a cream to powder shadow, I feel like they're going to go off quicker than just a standard powder shadow. So my other Natasha Denona palette that has pan in it is the Natasha Denona Retro palette. This is one of my more used eyeshadow palettes within my collection. So I have pan on the shade Andy here, which is just like a really pretty kind of pinky purple shade. It is on the more cool tone side. I have pan on the shade Mod, which looks like a matte, like white shade. So I have used it to set down my eyeshadow primer, but it has a little bit of pinkness to it. And I absolutely love using that as a matte inner corner highlight shade. I just feel like it's super pretty. And then I also have I also have pan on the center shade, which is Psychedelic. Psychedelic is a really pretty, like, icy pink kind of shade. It works really well as a topper shade, but it's also really pretty if you layer it up and just use it as a standalone lid shade. And then the last pan that I have is the shade Rebellion down here, which is just a really pretty, nice, like mulberry kind of shade, like a really nice wine kind of shade. Actually, this palette is what I have on my eyes today. So yeah, this is just a great all year round palette for me, but I really do love the berry tones in the fall months. All right, so our second to last palette to talk about comes from Shroud Cosmetics. So this was the first collaboration palette that they did with Batty Bean. So this is the It's Freaking Bats palette. Now, if I open this one up, I only have 1 pan in here, and it is in the shade 0. I will say the shimmer formula, especially with this 0 shade, is a little bit like soft. And I think this palette is hand pressed, so that might be part of it. But I'm finding that I've hit pan in it kind of up here near the top of the like pan. But down here at the bottom, the shadow is starting to like kind of crumble out. Like as I picked this palette up from my pile over here, a little bit of it did crumble out into the floor. So I'm only referencing that because I'm curious to see if you own this palette or any of the Shroud palettes, do you find that to be the case? Like their shadows are just a little bit too soft in there? I think I might end up repressing this shade, but either way, the 0 shade is really pretty. It's one of those interesting shifty shades where it has like some blue, green, and purpleness to it, and depending on what you pair it with, that's what's gonna pull through more. So I really do love that shadow, and I love this palette as a whole. I believe I have a 2 looks 1 palette video already up with this palette, so I can leave that linked in the cards above if you're interested. So the last and final palette to talk about comes from Sugar Drizzle Cosmetics. So this is the Frosty Flamingo palette. This was the first palette that I tried from Sugar Drizzle and just absolutely fell in love with the brand. I just love the pinks and the berries and the purples of this palette, and for it being a 9-pan palette, I feel like there's so much variety that you can do with this. So I do have pan in this matte purple shade up here, Shrimp Slushy, and then I have pan in the shade Pinkaberry down here, which is just the most beautiful like multi-chrome shadow. For me, it looks very pink on camera, but I'm guessing maybe hopefully for you guys, it looks more of like a green. Just really pretty. I absolutely love using this shade. Again, I have a video where I used this palette and did a look, and I'm pretty sure I used that Pinkaberry shade, so I'll leave that link down below if you want to see that shadow in action. But that is it. That is all 55 of my eyeshadow pans, minus the 4 ColourPop Super Shock shadows. So I thank you guys so much for sticking around and making it to the end. If you keep track of these kinds of stats in your own collection, I would love to know down below how many pans you have total in your collection, and how many, out of all your total pans, how many of those have pan on them. It's kind of weird that we use the word pan and mean like two different things. But either way, I hope you're having a good day or a good night or a good whatever. And I will catch you in the next one. Bye.